what about it? Of this investigation? I mean, there are still a lot of accusations not being approved yet. So when you have already such a wide spread story against the tiger temple, is it fair? Some would also argue.
I think this story is very welcome, and I think that all of us who care about our relationship with the natural world should celebrate this investigation. To me, it's part of this wider academic picture of us reinterpreting and reevaluating our relationship with tigers. The British, of course, don't have a great historical story with tigers. We shot them in the 19th century, well into the 20th century for sport. But now tigers have become, if you like, recreational destinations in themselves. And this investigation and our re-questioning of what sort of tourism we want with tigers, I think is a very dynamic part of the story that will be taken forward. And I would always be on the side of wild tiger ecotourism rather than this captive tourism.
But how many among us will be able to go into the wilderness to get close to tigers? And if we do that, Mr. Lambert, that could also create other issues. For example, overpopulated tourists into the wilderness that would destroy the environment, not only challenging the tigers, but also challenging many other animals in the wild. Also, of course, there's the issue of human being safety as well if they're going into the wilderness and encounter wild animals. So which plan is better at this moment?
I think here in the Western world, there has been a real shift away. You can see that in the way that we have reacted to SeaWorld. There's been a great shift in the way that we've embraced ecotourism, and we want to see these animals in the wild. Zoos, particularly badly run ones, are slipping out of favour. My vision for tigers as part of a conservation strategy is one where there's a vibrant ecotourism connection, where it is well managed, it is well orchestrated, well planned, where the money is pumped back into local communities, where they benefit, where the tigers themselves benefit in conservation initiatives, and where NGOs are heavily involved from the outset. So the future is, if you like, I think, very well planned, organised and managed tiger ecotourism, where numbers of tourists are themselves capped.
Okay, Mr. Lambert, if I could just follow up very briefly with you before I go to our other panelists. This is a very long list you just said. Of course, if all sides are being satisfied, that would be great. But how could one plan be able to make so many players happy? That is a big question mark. And secondly, it is not a rare thing that many of the Western tourists, they come to developing countries to do tourism that in their own countries they would not be able to do. It is not lack of examples of that. So on the one hand, are we having double standards in this regard? And secondly, are you going to have a beautiful plan that will make everybody happy? Will that plan come immediately? Or we have to wait for decades until economies are developing to the Western standards to make that happen? Mr. Lambert, very briefly from you before I go to Ms. Suresh. Mr. Lambert, I heard some siren sounds over there, but...
I think the vision is a partnership. Yeah, the vision is a partnership between government, NGOs, law enforcement agencies, ecotourism operators, and the tourists themselves, who, as you quite rightly say, have to take responsibility for their actions and their connections with nature when they travel abroad. It is no use being a tourist in Britain and caring about nature and then taking a very cavalier attitude towards it when you are in India or China or other parts of the world. I do think there is a move away from captive tourism experiences to more wild, if you like, nature tourism, ecotourism, wilderness tourism experiences.
Right. Ms. Suresh, you are the expert, I guess, when it comes to when it comes to the issues in Asia. For example, this specific temple is having its proceeds coming from those so-called entertainment related to the animals, particularly tiger, eventually to support the temple, which they argue could eventually benefit people in the surrounding areas, because this temple is supposed to be a place where many people go for spiritual help. So in that regard, they seem to be having their argument, and that seems to be valid to a certain extent. So in that regard, what do you make of the preconditions that Mr. Lambert just argued over there? In a place as poor as Thailand, will the beautiful dream list of Mr. Lambert come into being in the immediate future?
I absolutely agree with Dr. Lambert that much more can be generated through ecotourism. I come from India, where I have had the good fortune to see a tiger in the wild, and the experience does not compare with anything that you would see in these facilities. The organization I work for, the Environmental Investigation Agency, has been investigating facilities like the Tiger Temple, tiger farms in Thailand, tiger farms in China, Laos, where we have seen that the trade from these facilities has an impact on the last remaining wild tigers. Captive tiger trade has an impact on poaching in India and Nepal and Thailand, and indeed in other countries that have the last remaining wild tigers. So what we are calling for is the closure of these facilities, because there is no doubt that there is a link in terms of stimulating demand for tiger parts and products and undermining enforcement efforts. Rangers and enforcement officers in India and Nepal are risking their lives to save these amazing species, and we need to be supporting them as much as possible. And that would mean that all of these facilities that are feeding into the tiger trade, and I'm talking about not just Thailand, but that's Laos, Vietnam, and China, they need to take stock of the number of captive tigers in their countries and to start taking measures to closing these facilities. In Thailand, it's not just the Tiger Temple. We're talking about at least 24 facilities containing more than 1,450 tigers in captivity. In China, we're talking about more than 5,000 tigers in tiger farms and other big facilities. One of the largest facilities in northern China has more than 1,300 tigers. That's nearly 10 times the size of the Tiger Temple. And this has, as recently as April this year, been implicated in the tiger trade. So all of these countries need to be working together to end demand, end tiger trade, so that we can achieve the ultimate goal of zero poaching, zero demand, which is the only way we will be able to save the wild tigers.
We see that's happening in India. We see that's happening in some other countries also that are having breeds of tigers. But having said that, though, many are looking at the economic root of this problem. If we also take a look at the revenue coming from the Tiger Temple, that's originally from those tigers, visitors are charged an entry fee of 600 Thai baht. That's about $16 with additional cost to pet or feed the tigers. With thousands of people flocking to the temple every year, the annual income estimated to be around 100 million Thai baht, or about 2.8 million US dollars. That's certainly a lot of money over there. We do not know necessarily as to how the money is being spent. That is, I guess, a part of the investigation. Having said that, though, Ms. Suresh, as a animal protection agency worker yourself, you know very well that many of the governments, including here in China, have already issued quite strict regulations to protect wild animals from being poached or killed or captivated. However, there have been a very strong cultural root in the trafficking of animals, for example, believing certain parts of the animal be used for medicine and many other things. This has a lot to do with the cultures. How fast the regulations can be implemented and how well can the regulations be implemented is a big question mark, especially when we are talking about poaching in the wilderness. Ms. Suresh.
I think you've raised a very good issue about the laws and regulations in these countries. What we've found that in China and in Laos, the laws do permit a legal permitted trade in captive tiger parts and products, and we believe that this is a huge loophole in the system. The Environmental Investigation Agency has come across a taxidermist, for example, in China, who was selling a captive tiger skin rug for luxury home decor. And this came with a permit issued by the State Forestry Administration, the government of China. And he also went on to speak about how he abuses this system and how he's also involved in processing wild tiger skins sourced from India, and how it's very easy to manipulate the system. So this is a big loophole, and indeed regulations and laws need to be addressed. They need to clearly prohibit all trade in tiger parts and products. And as you said, laws and regulations also need to be enforced. It's not just that you have them on paper, they need to be converted into action on the ground.
Mr. Lambert, a lot of economic interests are being involved, and countries that Ms. Suresh mentioned, a lot of them are developing countries or very poor countries in Asia and in Africa. So we have seen very similar issues with other endangered animals, that the poaching could be a big problem, even though the government and also the local communities sent out their volunteer groups, even the police, our forestry police, going into the wilderness in order to catch these people, to prevent things from happening. Some of them even lost their lives. We have movies here in China talking about how some of the forestry police try to protect the wild animals, but really lost their lives in large amount even. But still, things like that happen. So once again, I'm talking about the efficiency of issues like this. How far are we really from the ideal? And eventually, it's a debate about development stage. It's a debate of the ultimate relations between animals and also human beings.
Absolutely. And in the 21st century, that debate is changing and evolves over time from region to region. For me, one of the key issues here is the way that we globally, as a world community, value tigers as part of a global natural heritage, as part of our images of the wild. In a sense, tigers, their symbolism transcends national boundaries. It's also about, I think, how we value nature. Do we value it financially? Or do we value it spiritually, emotionally, romantically? And there are conflicts there that are being played out in developed as well as developing nations. I'm a great believer in not only for wild tigers that impact on livestock, but also for any rehabilitated tigers from this temple that I hope will eventually, through philanthropy and other areas of NGO work, be put back into reserves so that they can live a better life than they've been living in this temple. So in the end, it's about how we value nature, and it's in the end ultimately about how we relate to predators in the 21st century. And in my view, a tiger that is alive is worth more than a tiger that is in parts.
And also, Ms. Suresh, the same question to you. We've seen similar stories a few years ago with Tibetan antelopes as well. The furs of it are mainly consumed in the West at the time by the richest countries' consumers. But of course, that story has been one, and we see another one with tigers and many other animals. So the question, once again, is the global view of our relations with the wildness and also with the animals. Very briefly, we've got 30 seconds for you. Please respond. Thank you.
This is a global issue indeed, and in a few months the UN Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species meets in South Africa, where the issue of tiger farming, the issue of Tibetan antelope, and indeed the issue of ivory trade will be on the table. We hope that countries like Thailand, China, Laos and Vietnam come together to announce that they will not support tiger farming at this conference.